Welcome to the Critique of the Week. I'm al-Sirgany, and I am here with Monica Prince, author of Instructions for Temporary Survival, winner of Red Mountain's Discovery Award, and How to Exterminate the Black Woman out on Pank this year. Monica was so wonderful to come in and join us for 1 week Critique of the Week. It's our second one. And I'm particularly excited about this interview because Monica and I are increasingly old friends, going all the way back to our first year days at Knox College. I won't tell you what year.
No, I'll make us feel really old.
So Monica, tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Well, I'm Monica. The thing I'm supposed to say is I'm an assistant professor of activist and performance writing at Susquehanna University in central Pennsylvania. No one knows what that means. I'm the only person in the country with that title. So it basically means I teach students how to use poetry as a soapbox, if you will, and how to discuss their activist tendencies in productive ways that aren't just putting their bodies in front of tear gas bullets and riot gear police, but also using poetry as a platform in other ways. So spicing up their feelings about climate change and reproductive rights and other forms of political issues, and that's what I do. But I do it in the creative writing department instead of in like poli-sci or theater, which is kind of strange, but it's good. It's fun. It's been a good time. Yeah.
Cool. So let's give you your soapbox. Will you go ahead and read us the earliest version of this poem?
Absolutely. So this poem, its very first draft, it's called Black Girl Magic Origin Story, and this is a draft that came to me while I was trying to fall asleep and I was failing. And so I wrote a whole bunch of prompts for this poem, and the prompt that I thought would be best for this poem was the very first line, which is "Once I loved with my eyes closed," and that's how this poem started. So I'm going to read it for you.
Cool.
Once I loved with my eyes closed. I reached out and asked the goddesses and my foremothers for strength. I said, "Open my chest that my heart may beat in plain air," and they did. My body birthed 3 children for a man who made a good father but a poor husband. But my mother, her mother, and her mother said, "We bring life not to sustain it, but to enrich it." Every generation creates a healer. My womb made you such. So frequently do I light candles for you, sing in the circle of crystals and salt, pour out wine in your honor. You, my baby girl, emit blessings from your fingertips. You are who we have been waiting for all this time. Your voice calms tsunamis. Your touch cures illness. Your heartbeat inspires a dance across oceans and deserts. Can't you see, baby girl, the universe braided in your hair? Forehead stained with earth in reverence for you. This moment, open all the worlds between your blood cells. Call forth the ancient power instilled in you at birth. Come into your own. You are a child of God, of Mother Earth, of galaxies beyond your imagination. You reign as a savior of despair. Between your heart and your hips sits a soul drenched in something new. It radiates when you walk. I made you intentionally. I craved you, celebrated you from the second you entered my blood. You are the next coming, the blessed healer. You are excellence, bold, beautiful magic. I did not need to see you to know this.
All right. So, of course, one of the main intentions of the Critique of the Week is to take a look at a poem in an early draft and to talk our way through how you got to a later draft. Critically about this poem, it's both a sestina and it became a part of the choreopoem, How to Exterminate the Black Woman.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can you tell us first a little bit about what a sestina is and why you chose it for your particular piece?
Absolutely. So a sestina is a really, really old form of poetry. I believe it comes from the French. That sounds right. I taught this last year in my forms of poetry class. It's a French form. It's typically unrhymed, and it includes 6 stanzas of 6 lines. It's a 39-line poem, but it's 6 stanzas of 6 lines. And then it ends with a final envoy, which is a 3-line stanza. And envoy in French means to send, but essentially the idea is like, this is what sends off the poem into the world. And so the reason it's called a sestina is because it creates a pattern of 6 words that are repeated at the end of every single line in those 6 stanzas in a different order every time. And there's one easy way to write a sestina where you pick your 6 words and you number them 1 through 6. And then you write the pattern of those numbers. And the way I used to do this, and this is actually how the poem turned out to be, is I'd write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, right? And that's how this poem looks. Like if you look at it, that's exactly how it's done. And then of course, because that's how I remembered writing a sestina when I learned it in grad school. And then of course, I'm teaching the form to my students last fall, right? This poem was written like 4 years ago. And I'm teaching the sestina to my students last fall, and I realized that this is incredibly incorrect. Like the numbers are wrong. And so technically this is a broken sestina, as they say, because the words aren't exactly in the right order, but I don't feel bad about it. No one's called me on it, so whatever. I'm gonna keep calling it a sestina. No one's called me on it, so it's fine. But that's how they're done. Every line ends with a word that repeats itself again in the next stanza, and then in the final stanza, the 3 lines, those 6 words show up allegedly 2 lines per stanza. But the way this poem changes is I break the rule again, and I just put all the 6 words in the first 2 stanzas, first 2 lines, and then the last line is just like on its own, because I was determined to finish the poem with this particular line. And so that's just how it is. It's a broken sestina, but I don't feel bad about it. It's still a good poem.
It's a phenomenal poem. So my next question is how this poem got to be part of your choreopoem work. It actually appears in both of your recent books, but I think to get to that question, it's important to talk a little bit about what a choreopoem is and your history with the choreopoem.
Absolutely. So the choreopoem started with, and I don't even know if I can find the book for you. It's in here somewhere. I bet I can find it. Nope, too late. All right. So the very first ever choreopoem, the person who coined this phrase is Ntozake Shange, who wrote the choreopoem For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow's Enough. She wrote it in 1975. I think she wrote it before that, but like we say, it was 1975. And it started off as a 1-woman show she was just doing in bars, right, in San Francisco. And she was just running around performing the show. And it was just a way to talk about what it meant to be a woman of color in the 1970s. But eventually the show grew, and her sister actually helped her choreograph the show, because it moved from just being a woman on stage reciting poetry to 7 women on stage reciting poetry and dancing and singing and, invoking the gods and all kinds of things. And so the official definition of a choreopoem, at least according to me, because I've been studying these since college, is it's a choreographed series of poems involving performance poetry, dance, music, art, and other forms.
We take a time out. You're not with us anymore.
Oh, no, I need to drink some water.
And we're back. The official definition of a choreopoem, according to Monica Prince.
Yes, the official definition of a choreopoem, according to me, is a choreographed series of poems, including performance poetry, dance, music, art, and other forms of creativity. So you can include parkour, you can include yoga, There's a lot of theatrical elements, breaking the fourth wall, where characters are in the audience and asking the audience questions, all kinds of things like that. The purpose of the choreopoem is essentially to showcase an experience that is frequently dismissed, if you will. And so that was the purpose of the very first one. And Tasaki's choreopoem was all about the life of Black women during the 1970s, which is important because we're at the tail end of the civil rights movement at that point. The civil rights movement was largely led by Black men, and Black women and other women of color were frequently ignored with their efforts associated with the movement, which didn't make a lot of sense because a lot of those women went to jail for Dr. King. They were the ones who actually bailed out a lot of the people who went to jail. They were in charge of making sure there was food available. So, but a lot of those women do not get any sort of recognition. So the fact that Ntozake Shange wrote in this show and performed it all over the country was a testament to the idea that we frequently ignore the hidden labor of people in the movement because their names aren't, fancy, because they aren't on stages. But the reason they're not on stages is because of, patriarchy. So, so the whole show just emphasizes like the life of women of color. It talks about abortion, it talks about sex, losing your virginity, sexual assault, falling in love, friendships, dance. It's just all about like expression. And it's one of the most important shows in American history. It has been performed all over the country and all over the world. It's been translated into a bunch of languages. It was made into a movie by Tyler Perry in 2010, but we're not going to talk about that. It wasn't a bad movie. It just didn't include all the poems, which I thought was weird. So I started researching choreopoems back in 2011 when I wrote my first one, which is called Confessions in Living Colored, but now it's called Testify, because that makes way more sense than a pun. So it's called Testify, and that is a show that focuses on college-age people of color navigating predominantly white spaces and trying to live the best life possible. And I've written 5 since college, and the most recent one is actually not the most recent one. The one I just got published is How to Exterminate the Black Woman. And that show focuses on a Black woman named Angela who has let's call it an epiphany, but that's not what it is. It's more like a realization that the world doesn't want her. They want her labor, they want her culture, they want her effort, but they don't want her. And it's a shocking realization for her, and it makes her fracture into 6 different emotions. And those emotions are fear, loss, expectation, fury, silence, and new. And the idea is each of these women who you see for the whole show, you actually don't see Angela until the very end. You see her in the beginning, you see her at the end. But these 6 women operate on stage as like who Angela would be if she was only this experience, if she was only an angry Black woman, if she was the Black woman who never speaks up, if she was the Black woman meeting the expectations while also like expecting because she's pregnant, and all these other forms of like Black women that we like to put into boxes, and we only assume those stereotypes of them. And the only one who doesn't actually operate that way is Nu, the character Nu. She's the only one who's named after an adjective. And so as a result, she's the one who tries the hardest throughout the show to put Angela back together. She's the one who forces the women back on stage together. She's the one who forces them to basically name why they feel the way they feel, as a way to finally put them in sync. So they all end up dancing together near the end of the show, and that's how they put Angela back together. And the reason why the poem Black Girl Magic Origin Story shows up in both books is because in Instructions for Temporary Survival, which is also the first poem in How to Exterminate the Black Woman, that book is focused on like the 4 different elements of what it means to survive as a Black person. So the first section is about Blackness. The second one is about like sex and love. The third is about mental health and belonging. And the final is about like practical tips of how to live in the world. And so the reason why the poem shows up in both books is because it's both. First of all, it's that important to me, and I like had to fight my editor to let me keep it in there. But also because I think that the poem.
We lost you again.
Oh no!
And we're back one more time.
So I had to fight my editor to let me keep the poem in both books because, well, my editor for the first book, because I really wanted that poem in there. And also because that poem is written in the voice of my mother. And I think it's important that poems written in the voice of Black women who are not me need to be as available as possible, basically. And so how it shows up in How to Exterminate the Black Woman, it's written in the voice of Nu, who is that character, the one who is trying to put everyone back together. And she actually recites most of the Susquehannas in the show, but she seems to think that if she keeps invoking this pattern, right, the pattern of the Susquehanna, that it'll be enough to put Angela back together. And she gets really angry after this poem because it's not enough, right? And eventually she manages to she stops using that form as a way to get the characters back together. And it's enough to actually put Angela back together, and then Angela uses the form to keep herself together. And so that's how I use the Susquehanna. The Susquehanna is a difficult form because it focuses a lot on circular narration, which is like, and that doesn't even make sense, like as I'm saying it out loud, but the narration of a story kind of requires like, you know, beginning, a middle, and end. You can kind of jump around in that sense, but when you're writing a narrative poem, there's a resistance to repeat yourself, right? You don't want to say the same thing over and over again. So by using the Susquehanna, it kind of forced me to repeat myself, to make this point that not just that the character is trying to remind the audience what's at stake, but also because the idea of the Black woman is that her struggle is so cyclical. It's the same struggle through generations. It's always the same problem. And the only difference now is that the character has realized it's the same problem. And once you realize something is the same, you can change it, you can fix it. And so that's really the purpose of the Susquehanna, why I changed the poem into a Susquehanna, was to make that point about like, if this is going to be in the voice of my mother, then it needs to be about how my mother realized that like it's going to be the same struggle, and that means something has to change.
So in terms of particularly the poem in the voice of your mother, your beautiful mother, who appears on the cover of your book.
She is on the cover of my book.
I think of this poem as developing from its original toward a more hopeful viewpoint over time. It also, over time, loses some of the specifics of your life and your mother's life. Can you tell us a little bit about how and why you made some changes to the poem and how it got to be in the form that it's in now?
Absolutely. So I decided I didn't want, when I started writing the choreopoem, originally the show was very much just about me. That was the original plan, was it was just going to be about me, because I originally started writing it with a friend of mine, but then like she got pregnant, so like she went off to go like have a baby, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'm not writing this with you anymore, which is fine. And so what I decided to do instead was to just write a show about me, right? I'd never done that before, and most of the show was focused on this like anxiety of being, 26, 27 and not wanting to have a kid, and being afraid that I was going to like be forced to have a baby. Not like forced in the sense like someone's going to impregnate me and make me have a baby, but just like the societal expectation of having children, I guess. And I was dealing with a lot of anxiety about that. I reread some journal of mine from like 2005, 15 or something. And and it talked about my life plan. And my plan was to be married by 27, have kids by 30, you know, buy a house by the time I was 29. I was going to go to graduate school. I was going to have a PhD, all this nonsense. And I'm reading this journal entry and I was just like, who wrote this? Like, who is this person? And I realized it was me. And I couldn't figure out, like, do I actually want children? Like, that was the idea. So I'm reading this thing. I'm obviously behind. You know, I don't have kids. I'm not married. And so I'm sitting here like, okay, so have I messed up my life, or am I just, have my priorities changed?
Yeah.
And so, and then soon after that, I had a conversation with my mom about having children. And I was just like, you know, I'm because my friend of mine had gotten pregnant, and I said something to her about how I was a little frustrated with her pregnancy because I didn't understand why she required so much excitement from us, like as her friends. And my mom said something that made me laugh. She was like, you know, in one way, yes, your friend being pregnant is a big deal. Like, it's a huge deal. She's never done this before. She's having a baby. She's, you know, creating life. And she's like, on the other hand, you know, women have been doing that for millennia. Like, it's not new. And I laughed so hard. She's like, look, by the time I was on my third baby, I wasn't excited either. Like, I was like, yeah, okay, we'll do this again. And it was so funny. And I remember thinking, like, all right, mom, like, if you can, you know, think about this in practical and also, like, you know, loving ways, then maybe I should think about this in the same way. And so I wrote that poem kind of as a response to that conversation about thinking that, like, what if my mom didn't actually want children? What if this is just something that she did because she thought she was supposed to? And so when I rewrote the poem as a sestina, I knew the poem needed to be a sestina because I was trying to get at something that I didn't actually have an understanding of, right? I was trying to get at the idea of, like, you know, the very last line of the poem, which is, my baby will change the world, right? And it was something my mom had, like, said in passing to someone who talked to her at some graduation. They were like, you know, aren't you proud of your daughter? And she was like, of course, you know, my kids will change the world. And she was like, said it so casually. And I was like, well, what does that look like in a poem? How do you get to that, like, unwavering, casual belief that your child's going to change the world? And so as I was rewriting it as a sestina, I kept thinking about, like, okay, all this has to get to this point. So I think I can go in circles until I find this idea, like this final statement. And I know that it's in my mother's voice because of the phrase baby girl. Like, that's a phrase, my mother does not say that, but, like, I love being called that. And so, and I think it's because I watch too much Criminal Minds, but I really love being called that. And so I put that in there as a way to kind of put myself in the poem as well. And so when it became the sestina, I knew it was done, as the jump ahead, right, is I knew it was done when how I edit my poems is I print them all out and I put them on my office wall, and I go after them with a colored pen of some sort, right? And so I just read them all out loud, and I, you know, check for typos, check for mistakes, I cross lines out, I rewrite lines, and I keep reading them out loud for, like, weeks on end. And I knew that poem was done when I'd done it like 6 or 7 times. And I knew that poem was done when I read it out loud. And at the end of the poem, I was just sobbing. And I was just like, oh, I guess this poem's finished because now I'm crying. And, like, and that was like the end. I don't think I edited it again. I think I was just finished. I just, you know, put it in all the manuscripts and just left it alone. I tweaked it a little bit for how to Exterminate the Black Woman, just to make sure that it flowed and it was easy to perform. But that was it. That was it for me. Does that even answer the question? I don't even know.
That totally answered the question. I think
okay.
It's a segue into what I'm hoping we're going to do next, which is I'm going to ask you to actually, it's a performance poem. We've talked a lot about the choreopoem. I'm hoping you can perform it.
Of course.
I'm going to also share the screen so that folks who are curious can kind of look at these two poems side by side. You can also find them later if you're looking for them at oneweekcritique.com.
Yeah.
Ta-da! I lost
Yeah,
you.
there they are.
All right.
No, it's perfect. Yeah, so I'm going to read this poem for you. It's performed by New, who is the character who wears purple in the show. And this is one of her last ditch efforts to just put Angela back together. So here it is. Black Girl Magic origin story. In the beginning, I loved with my eyes closed. Hands folded in prayer, I asked the four mothers for strength. Open my chest, I said, give me a girl whose body bleeds with the power of every woman who ruled before her and knew the capability of an exposed heartbeat. And they did. I placed my own heart into the crib, kissed you, kept the nursery door closed. My body made babies because my mother and the ones before her all said, we bring girls to life not to sustain this world, but to enrich it. What power in your generation, child, to know the gifts you possess. Here's what I know. One day, you will consider if breaking your heart for a child surpasses bringing your legacy to a close. Not every woman wants to be a mother. Not every goddess crafts excellence into a girl. And yet, your soul has an ancient power instilled in you at birth. I felt your power in my blood the moment I knew you would come. I danced to your heartbeat, poured out wine in your honor, prayed closely around your promised body as your mother. I braided the universe in your hair, baby girl. You're the reason I believe in invincible Black girls, why not even bullets can extinguish your power, why your voice weakens hurricanes. They should know better than to question the footsteps of your heart. You are not free until we're all free and we're close. I can see it. Can you, my miracle? The original mothers called for you purposefully. If you become a mother, pray to them and light candles and sing for a little girl who dances wildly, who conjures empowering revolutions with her hips, her outspread fingers. Know this, child. Brilliance is your birthright. Your heart cries, queen, for you are magic, dressed in royal clothes. This mother delivered a powerful Black girl. You. I closed my eyes, stopped my heart, and knew my baby will change the world.
All right. A little tingly. So hard to follow that up. So along with an activist, along with a poet, you're also a teacher.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some tips that you would give to young poets looking to do some work in this mode or in the activist modes that you teach? Absolutely.
So activist writing is a weird kind of genre because it requires a lot of internal work, if that makes sense. Because one of the reasons I think, well, one of the reasons I know activists die early is because A, they're saying something that the world doesn't want them to say, so someone assassinates them. Or B, they are saying something that exhausts them and they don't have like the support system to refill them. And so one of the first things I tell students who are interested in activist writing is to find like what sustains you, right? So one of the things that sustains me in activist writing is knowing that I can always do something else for a little while. So How to Exterminate the Black Woman was like a labor of intensive love, right? It was a lot of being attentive to the stories I wanted to tell. Like if I was going to talk about sex work, if I was going to talk about sexual assault, if I was going to discuss love and all those things weaving together. And then the next show I wrote was called Roadmap, and it's about a young Black man navigating his most likely cause of death, which is homicide. And that took a lot of work, and it made me think really deeply about like the ethics of asking an actor to portray their death on stage multiple times. Sure. And not like their death as the character, but their death as like a potential person who could be killed by homicide because they're a Black man. And so I worked really deeply determining like what I was prepared to ask of others and also what I was prepared to ask of myself. So I made a point to find the things in my life that sustain me, and that's like dancing and making martinis and watching terrible television, but also like you know, going for runs and spending time with my friends and cooking elaborate meals for no reason. And just finding the things that sustain me so that when even though I'm always thinking about this work, like I'm always thinking about the issues, I'm always thinking about what matters to history and what matters to the revolution, I spend a lot of time also doing other things that sustain me. Ada Limon talks about this. She talks about why she's such a slow writer. She thinks she's a slow writer. And I was like, I don't think so. This is like a book. But she talks about how she won't write for like months at a time. Like she'll go like 6 or 7, 8, 12 months without writing. And during that time, she calls it her gathering time. And that's when she's cooking, she's cleaning, she's gardening, she's spending time with friends, she's traveling, she's doing anything but write. But then she knows she's ready to write when like suddenly it just hits her and she just can't stop. And she can't stop for like months on end. And that's all she does for months. And she believes that like these breaks are important to the work. And I recognize that understanding of taking the time to fulfill yourself so you're able to pour it back out onto the page. The one thing I advise writers to do is find out what sustains you so that when you sit down to write the activist piece, whether it's an essay about your experience with microaggressions or a poem about navigating the N-word, or you know, a short story in which like a little girl gets like lured into the woods for something horrible, right? Whether we are sitting down to write tributes to the fallen or we're just trying to like bring a little joy into the world, it's important to know that once you pour it out, like you have to find another way to be refilled. And sometimes your self-care tactics don't work and you have to find new ones, right? Like for a long time, yoga helped and then it just stopped helping. so I had to like rethink about why I was doing yoga in the first place. And so that really helped. And so that's one thing. The other thing is to think about why you became an activist in the first place. And if you don't identify as an activist, why? Like if you care about reproductive rights, if you care about climate change, if you care about racial revolutions, you have to think really deeply about like, why? Why do you care about that? Do you care about it because you think it's the right thing to do? Or do you care about it because you have like a direct connection to what's going on? And what that usually means is you have to change your understanding of what it means to be directly involved, right? So I care about the rights of the disabled, not because I'm disabled, but because like it's the right thing to do, but also because I teach so many students with disabilities that like it would be immoral as a professor to not care about those rights. And so that means that I have to work harder to make sure my shows are more accessible, right? Like from How to Exterminate the Black Woman to Roadmap, which are like those were written 2 years apart. Roadmap is far more inclusive and far more accessible than How to Exterminate the Black Woman, because How to Exterminate the Black Woman is so focused on like cisgendered women and heterosexual relationships that it's like really difficult for people with other identities to enter into that show, or rather to see themselves in that show. They can see the show in their heads, but they can't like enter into it the same way. Roadmap, though it focuses, even though the main character is a man, like the dancers are all non-binary. Even the woman he loves like could be played by a trans woman. Like there's more emphasis on the inclusion aspect in that show, because and what it proves to me is that between these shows, I learn more, right? I learn more about inclusivity, I learn more about intersectionality, and then it forces my writing to change because I want this work to be more and more open as I continue to change it. And so ultimately, when we sit down to write activist work, I want writers to think about like, who is this for? Is it just for you? Are you preaching to the choir? Or are you speaking to people who might not share your beliefs? And that's the benefit of the choreopoem structure as a whole, is that you're able to put people in the room who don't necessarily know why they're there. They're probably there because they saw the title, How to Exterminate the Black Woman, and they're like, I feel like I should show up to that because maybe they want to exterminate the Black woman, or they want to know why someone would call a show that. And they're in the room for that basic reason. And when they're provided with an opportunity to think deeply about how we can protect this class of people, how we can protect this group that is frequently under genocide, then we can access more and more people who need to hear that fact and who need to be a part of that revolution. So that's essentially, I think that answers your question.
No, I think that's a very thorough answer to my question. I appreciate
Good.
Speaking of thorough answers, the one thing we really haven't gotten around to discussing too much that I hope we can before we leave, as always, I assume most of the folks who are watching this video know that they can find One Week Critique at oneweekcritique.com. That's the number one. Similarly, One Week Critique at Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of that. But you are a teacher, you are an editor and a writer, as well as an activist. You're a very busy lady. I'm sure there are some folks who would love to know where they can find your work, where they can find you online, where they can pursue you as an editor, and where they can continue to get some of your words of wisdom as a professor. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the best way to find me is through my social media platforms, because that's probably the most updated version of anything. On Facebook, I'm just, facebook.com/miss.prince, because I managed to reserve that in the early aughts. So, in the beginning of Facebook. So you can find me there. On Twitter, on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at poetic_Moni, MONI. And you can find me there. I also have a website, www.monicaprince.com. It's mostly updated. That was like my New Year's resolution, was to update it once a month. I'm trying, y'all. It currently probably is advertising a reading I did in April, but that's okay. I also have, my books. My books are available both books are available through spd.com, which is small press distribution. They're both available through there. You can also find Instructions for Temporary Survival at redmountainpress.us. And you can find How to Exterminate the Black Woman at pankmagazine.com. And if you're interested in performing that show, you can also get the rights to the show through Pank. I think you email awesome@pankmagazine.com, and that's it. I'm also an editor for Santa Fe Writers Project. I do way too many things. So if you want to submit your prose, because we only publish prose through that, which I find funny because I'm a poet, but submit your work to Santa Fe Writers Project quarterly. We'd love to read it. And I think those are all the things I do.
And
yeah.
Being at Susquehanna University and seeing these
Come to Susquehanna if you're a person who wants to get an undergraduate degree. Come to Susquehanna. We do cool stuff. I actually teach a class on the choreopoem, and the students in that class get to write their own choreopoem and produce it in the same semester. So come through. And you can also, if you just want to come see the show, that's acceptable too. Oh, and I wrote a play with Anna Andes called A Pageant of Agitating Women, which focuses on the suffrage movement, because we're in the 100-year anniversary of white women's suffrage in the US. It's all about the right to vote, and it talks about all the unsung heroes of the suffrage movement, and that goes live at Susquehanna University in October. Allegedly, we will see.
Indeed. Monica Prince, as always, a pleasure, and thank you for being here today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Bye.